Thank you very much. Apologies if I do fall asleep at any point through the talk. It has been quite a rough few nights. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how VR can actually hit mass adoption, because it is, in my opinion, a very exciting new tech, which is kind of stumbling a bit. And I want to just look at why it's stumbling and how it can reach a point where it becomes part of our daily life, or part of daily life for billions of people, as Zuckerberg put it. So yeah, I'm from Visualise. We're a VR studio based here in London. And over the last 4 years, we've produced some big experiences right around the globe for all kinds of industries, everything from charity through to automotive, agency work, even stuff for the British Army. But VR now, I think a great way of looking at where VR's got to in terms of its adoption is to look at this thing here. And this is called the hype cycle of new technologies. And it's also known as the Gartner hype cycle. And generally what it's saying is that when a new technology is launched, there's a huge amount of hype around it. Everyone talks about it, and that's the kind of peak. And then there's this phasing off and into what's brilliantly called the trough of disillusionment. And then usually there's a growth, a kind of movement back out of that curve, then either to mass adoption or to failure. And if it doesn't make it out, then it's called it doesn't cross the chasm. And actually, Gartner, the guys who produced this original hype cycle, have put VR around here at the moment on the curve, so could go either way. But what's the problem with VR? And I think that there's three things that I think are kind of the perceived problems right now with VR, or perceived or real problems. And the first is the fact that it's very isolating. So you put a headset on, and whoever you're with in the room disappears. And I think that's a real important problem. And I think that some of the stuff I'll chat through in a minute will explain how we get around that, and actually how VR can be seen to be something which is a great social connector. Clunky as well. The headsets are something which we'll definitely laugh about in a few years. You know, having a kind of lunchbox on the front of your face isn't cool. And the behavioral change needed as well to make people want to sit there, and rather than watching Netflix or whatever, to actually put this lunchbox on your face and then get into this other world. Like, that's a big, big change you're asking people to do. So those are the kind of main hurdles for VR at the moment. So I looked at all these things, and I looked at a prediction by Goldman Sachs. And it said that by 2025, VR is going to be bigger than TV, which is an amazing prediction to have. And so I tried to plot what's going to have to happen between now and 2025 to actually make VR happen. So, and these are the things. So starting off, we've got Apple and Microsoft. Apple obviously recently announced that huge support for AR. They've also announced support for tethered VR, which means, you know, attached to their iMac, you put an HTC Vive on or an Oculus, and you can be in the virtual world. Big step forward, actually. Microsoft massively backing VR now. New headsets coming out from Dell, Asus, and Acer. Predominantly kind of mixed reality headsets as well, which means that, as Richard was mentioning earlier, you'd be able to view the real world through the headset too. So that's one of the first steps. Gaming is what everyone seems to really be fixated on, gaming with virtual reality. But actually, if you look at the stats, if you look at the Oculus mobile platform, gaming is less than 50% of the content viewed on there, which leaves a huge amount down to cinematic VR and also practical uses of VR. But one of the things where I think gaming is going to be hugely useful is in building the systems for multiplayer collaboration and fun and interaction between people, which is then going to have to transfer over to VR as a whole. Cinematic VR, I mean, I think there's this completely pointless argument in the virtual reality world as to whether or not 360 video is or isn't VR. For me, I think it's been one of the most important things for virtual reality in terms of pulling it through this trough of disillusionment. And if you look at some of the films and some of the Hollywood studios that are backing VR now, and you've got things like Dunkirk, Jurassic Park, Wild, all these huge Hollywood blockbusters that have VR trailers now coming out with them, it's only a matter of time until cinematic VR just becomes far, far more frequent and something which people watch routinely. And actually, this guy here, Alexander Gonzalez Inarritu, who directed The Revenant, produced the kind of next stage for cinematic VR or for 360 video, which is an experience rather than just a film. And this is one of the really interesting things with VR, is that you don't need to be confined to traditional media in the way that you are with film or TV or computer games even. You're actually able to explore a story in a way that isn't just linear. You can be put in a world, walk around it, discover this world, feel the world yourself. And that's what Innovators did when he produced an experience which launched at Cannes. It was a completely different way of telling a story. And we don't even know how people are going to tell a story yet in VR. There's all these different options for branching narratives, for influencing the story yourself, for being a character in the films. So much is going to change. And as already mentioned by Richard as well, Ready Player One is actually being made into a film by Steven Spielberg. It's coming out in kind of spring next year. And it's going to introduce the world at large to this concept of what's called the metaverse, this other world that we can escape into, or this other world that we can collaborate in, play in, watch sports in, do shopping in. It's literally the place you go when you put that headset on. And it's going to be a kind of fun, trashy film, but I think it's got some excellent and kind of amazing bigger picture stuff that it can explain to the world. The idea of live VR has been around for a while. Live 360 video has been around for a while. And actually, I think most of the time it's been pretty rubbish. And it's been very much constrained by the camera's upload, download speeds, where it can be placed, how it can be viewed. There's been a lot of issues, but the brakes are starting to come off this now. And you're starting to, Facebook and YouTube now allow for live 360 content to be streamed in 4K. And that's the kind of resolution you need to actually be able to see decent detail and stuff. When they had live cameras in 360 at the Olympics, they were miles away from the action. They had to be behind the photographers who've got these huge long lenses, and you're shooting stuff on fisheyes, miles away from the action. You can't see a thing. It's pointless. You need to use it in the right place, and you need to have the right bandwidth, and you need to have the right systems built to allow it to really work. But it can now work. But really, live is going to come to life once you're able to actually, and this is where it gets fantastic for me, but the idea is that you will be able to actually walk around a pitch or a court while a match is on and walk up to the players and watch them from whatever angle you want. Because if you can track yourself, if you have trackers around a room and you can put a headset on and you can walk around that room and you're in this virtual world, then the idea is that you can then scan whatever that match is from every single possible angle. You can 3D scan it live, and you can then put a headset on and walk around that place in volumetric terms, and that's called volumetric video. And so you're watching live an event that you could walk up to Federer, for example, just kind of stand at the baseline at center court, watch him serve in front of you. And who wouldn't want to watch that? I think that's one of the main kind of things that's going to drive VR and mass adoption. Retail is hugely important too. I mean, you can't customize a car in front of yourself in a showroom, but you can in VR. You could stand there and change everything about it. You could then sit in that car and then have a famous driver take you for a test drive. You can have all kinds of customized retail experiences. And from a retail perspective, from the brand's perspective, they can do that for you in the absolutely perfect brand shop. You don't get constrained by any kind of finances or gravity or like local costs of shops or anything like that. So they can have this incredible retail environment that you walk around and you can pull shelves towards you, which the AI can tell you it knows good kind of clothes that you like. But for VR to really be taken up in mass adoption, the cost has to come right down. A £2,000 headset, computer, and headphones doesn't make sense for mass adoption. It really needs to be driven by mobile or driven by units which are just significantly cheaper than that. And at the moment, the technology just costs too much. So it's going to be a number of years until that cost comes down to a point where people either have it already in their pocket, and that's used in headsets like the Gear VR or like Google Daydream, or until it's a standalone device that's just at a price point that people can actually afford. So mobile phones, I've mentioned a couple of times, they are really vital for this. And one of the new technologies that has to come with mobile phones is the idea that they can actually track what's called inside out. So they can scan the room that you're in and actually kind of feed back that information to themselves, and that allows you then to walk around that room. And that ability to move around a virtual area using a mobile phone is called inside-out tracking. And for that to happen is going to be a few years off. The phones will need to be significantly more powerful. Although with the new iPhone X, that ability is getting closer. But really, I think the biggest single thing out of all of these things that's going to enable virtual reality is actually augmented reality. And I don't mean augmented reality on a phone. I like that, but I think when it's on glasses is when you're going to really start seeing a massive change in the way that people start using virtual reality, because putting on a pair of glasses and having information overlaid on the real world is going to be incredibly useful in daily life immediately. And this will, augmented reality on headsets that isn't kind of semi-pointless like Google Glass, but actually really augments and helps you live in the real world, is going to really fast-track that technology, and it's going to be like a kind of smartphone-like take-up, whereas virtual reality is on a much slower burn. And I feel like augmented reality will be taken up by so many people that for virtual reality then it will just be a case of changing what you're seeing from being the real world to just overlaying the virtual complete takeover of your vision on those augmented reality glasses. And then all of a sudden, you've got all of this content that we're making, which is suddenly being able to be viewed by billions of people rather than the millions that it is at the moment. There's been also this huge growth in VR arcades recently, and over in China they had this massive boom, the idea that you go into these centers where they have these kind of really premium high-end VR experiences, and with not just the headset and headphones, but also kind of rumble chairs or hydraulic chairs, wind blowing, heat, this whole kind of extra sensory experience too. And these are now picking up a lot of momentum over in the US, and we're starting to get people asking us to put together experiences in the UK as well. So I think that's going to be a real thing, that you might go to the cinema, go to an IMAX, or you might go to a VR arcade and experience something there. But one of the things that VR really needs is collaboration between all of the main players. And at the moment, you've got these very isolated islands. So when people put their headset on and they go into this virtual world, they don't just go into the metaverse that's described in Ready Player One. They go into Google's place, or they go into Oculus's place, or Facebook's. And it really needs to come together for mass adoption to take off, because we need to. You've got very few users already, and if you pull them together, at least you've got a reasonable number. But at the moment, when we're making experiences for clients, you're making an experience maybe for Google on a Google Daydream platform, or you're making one for the FT that's paid for by Facebook, so it goes on that platform. And so it's very hard to actually get a decent number of people together. So I think that they really need to club together for this. The B2B applications for VR are absolutely massive, though, and it's really interesting. As we've seen that kind of hype cycle peak and then go down into this trough, what's coming out the other side is a lot more kind of practical B2B applications. So things like recruitment or training. I mean, I heard the talks earlier on space. The idea that you can have simulations in virtual reality that allow you to do repairs on space stations is a perfect example of a great use of VR from a B2B perspective. But for VR to be mass adoption, to be taken up by the masses, I think it has to be social. And this is the key thing. When you put that headset on, you have to be able to meet people in there, share experiences with people. Because, what's the point in going to watch an incredible gig and being on stage with your favorite band if it's just by yourself and you're just kind of shouting, yeah, by yourself? You want to be able to share that with somebody else. And so I think that those systems really need to be nailed down, and whether or not that's influenced by the gaming world, as I mentioned earlier, but there has to be a way that everything you do in VR, if you're watching a film, if you're watching a sports match, whatever it is, if you're playing a game, you should be able to do that with other people and see the other person there with you and communicate with them as well. So I put all those things on a timeline and tried to work out when I think all these things are going to happen. And if these things all do happen, I feel like you'll hit mass adoption here, and we'll have this Goldman Sachs VR is bigger than TV by 2025 at 2025. So yeah, there you go. Thank you very much.